And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein
Science! Science!
I know the human being and
Science!
can
Science!
coexist peacefully.
This was thou findest.
Guys, this is Petri Dish. I'm Nathan. I'm joined here with Sean.
Hi.
And Andrei Day.
I'm back.
Hey guys, we're going to talk about some shit that's super cool to me because I used to play a lot of video games. Mind-machine interfaces.
You used to play a lot of video games?
Yeah, I did used to play a lot of video games.
You still do.
Oh, yeah, I did. I played mostly...
It's like that Mitch Hedberg act, you know? I used to do drugs. I still do drugs.
but I used to, too.
I used to as well.
Okay, hardy fucking har, guys. All right. I'm also very happily married man. Anyway, so we got to talk about the different ways that we can read the mind, the ways that maybe we can make machine interfaces with the mind, and then maybe even where that'll go in the future.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, we've all seen The Matrix, right? And we all thought it was super cool that Keanu Reeves could download how to do kung fu and all those different martial arts. And I think that intrinsically that was very attractive to all of us. So is there some kind of way that we could hook up our minds to something like the internet and download all this information and maybe do it without having to stick some kind of crazy needle shit into the back of our heads, like into our brains or something, right? And so is there some other way we can do these interfaces, and what's the current state of that technology? And so I think that is what this episode, Mind-Machine Interface, is going to be all about.
So how do you read the mind?
Yeah, good question, dude. I don't know where everyone is coming from on this, but reading the mind involves reading electrical or magnetic fields, and those are made by the neurons that are inside of our mind. So,
I don't buy it.
What?
How is it that the thing that goes zip-zap into my microwave is also what makes me have thoughts?
That shit's not the same.
Oh.
Microwaves use microwaves.
Yeah, but you gotta put the electricity into the microwave, right?
God damn it.
Now
Okay.
you just put some plutonium in
Look,
its asshole and it
brains-
just eats up your shit.
About half the cells in your brain are neurons. And those neurons are able to use electric charge to send signals, and that creates an electric field. And we have a lot of different devices that can measure electric fields, like electrodes. And basically, at that point, we're just reading what these different neurons are sending out.
Okay, wait a minute though. Like, how can you say, so my neuron goes zip, zip, zap, right?
Yep.
And then like a scientist reads where they go zip, zap, and then is like, oh, well, he's thinking about chicken right now. like how can you read that? Like,
I mean,
Right.
it probably takes a lot of, like, knowing what you thinking about chicken looks like electromagnetically before you can then reinterpret unknown thoughts.
so this is more of the personalized medicine stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, kind of. So first thing I would say is what you can read out of the mind depends on where you're reading it from. So you have these signals going on in the brain, right? But I don't know, sometimes on TV shows or whatever, you'll see people sticking like the little sticky pads on somebody's skull, right? They'll like shave their head and then they'll put the little sticky pads on.
Yeah, is that real?
Yeah, that's a real thing. It's called an electroencephalogram, okay? Yeah. Which electro is electricity, encephalo means head, and gram means reading. It's not that exciting. It's just electricity brain read.
I'm still pretty excited.
I once saw a party game where you put, like, a little visor on your head and you can control, like, airflow to, like, move a ball through things.
Right, so
Wait, that's real shit?
That's a real thing. Like, that's
Yeah.
a product you
That's
can buy.
Jimmy Neutron, dude. That's not real, dude.
look, see
That's Nickelodeon.
Here's the thing is that your brain has different zones in it, okay? And those different zones control different bodily functions, all right? And the encephalograms that you read from outside of your head, the ones that are, you know, to go from your brain to the outside of your head, you have to go through something called the duramater, and then you have to go through the skull and your skin and maybe your hair. Once you get that far out, you're reading really general signals, right? You're not seeing a specific neuron blast off. You're seeing a bunch of neurons in maybe like the front of your head go, and then some neurons in the back go. And because your brain is set up to work in different zones, readings that far out are still specific enough that you can like play Pong or something like that. Where there's not that many things to control.
How the fuck do you play Pong?
Yeah.
Like, you think Pong, and then that lights up a part of your brain, and then, like, the helmet reads that lighting up and then moves the thing?
I mean, I think the way it works is you have, like, a paddle, right, or a virtual paddle, and first you have to register, right? So, like, you think left, and the machine registers what your brain patterns look like when you're thinking left. And then you think right, it registers those patterns. And then you start playing, and it just determines between left and right.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be left and right. It could be like what you think cheese smells like, and then what it's like to eat a pizza. And so long as these are thought patterns that you can reproduce reliably, you can train a machine to kind of understand what that signal looks like.
That shit is crazy, dude.
Yeah, but still, so from that far out, you're only kind of getting vague ideas. So you're right, though, that like using this kind of system, using an electroencephalogram, you wouldn't be able to just take a random person, put it on their head, and be like, think about pizza, and then have a computer draw what that pizza looked like, right? That's way too not specific. At best, the computer can just learn how to interpret consistent signals, but very diluted signals. Because these electrons, they're inside your skull.
Well, I was about to ask, what if you got, like, your electrosupergram, like, in the brain?
Right, yeah. So you can do something called electrocardiography. And in this case, you're going to take off that hair, you're going to take off that skin, you're going to pop that skull open.
Yeah.
Okay? And then you're either going to be on top or below what's called the duramater. So the duramater is kind of where the nerves...
That seems kind of intense just to play Pong.
Right. Yeah.
I don't like Pong that much.
Maybe World of Warcraft. Maybe that's what yeah, so at that point, you're putting sort of like... you're rolling out a whole sheet of electrodes to cover some part of their brain. You might be like literally just touching their brain with the sheet of electrodes for detection. Okay, so this is getting much closer to the source. So you get a way better signal. You get a cleaner signal, and that means that you can distinguish more kinds of thoughts.
Have we done that?
Oh yeah, we do that all the time.
Does that kill a person?
No.
You just put the head back on?
I mean, you don't cut their heads off. yeah, you mean the skull and everything? Yeah, you can put the skull back on. Sure, yeah. But I mean, you can. I don't know if you've ever seen videos like this, but people who have brain surgeries, a lot of times they'll be awake for it, and they'll be doing a brain surgery on a particular part, and they'll see if they've reached that zone by like asking you to say the alphabet or something. And then they'll kind of poke with an electrode on a spot, and suddenly you'll like not be able to say the alphabet anymore. There'll be people who'll be like A, B, C, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I've heard of people playing instruments while they're doing brain surgery on them.
Right, yeah, exactly. So
I'm not comfortable with that at all.
Open brain surgery while you're awake is a thing that happens a good amount.
Well, yeah, I don't like that. Wait, so why don't you feel any pain?
Right, yeah, that's a good question. The duramater, which is kind of, it's sort of like a skin under your skull. You have your skin out here, and you got your skull, and then under that you have the duramater, and that is what has nerves that sense pain in them. It's like when you get a headache, it's from those nerves, not any nerves in your head.
I hate the duramater.
Your actual brain doesn't have any pain-sensing nerves in it. So you can poke all you want around in the brain, and people can't feel it.
But they might.
You might just forget Spanish.
Right. Yeah. Oh, someone spoke to my brain then, because I don't remember a whole lot of that.
Yeah, so this ECOG, the electrocardiography, where you're doing it under the skull level, you get better resolution, you get better signal. But still, it's kind of the average of a lot of neurons. Neurons are cells. They're really fucking small, right? And when you're looking at these electrodes, you're averaging thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of neurons together into kind of these broader signals.
So if we're going to really read the brain right, we need to read a single neuron.
It would be nice to be able to read single neurons or like low hundreds, low thousands of neurons at a time. So it's still true that neurons have a tendency to signal in concert. They have a tendency to kind of, as groups, signal together. But in like the thousands, right? Not like the hundreds of thousands. And so it would be nicer to have probes that go into your brain to detect what small groups of neurons are doing. Then you could get really fine-tuned information about what people are thinking.
Do you think the strings inside neurons are finely tuned towards each other? Like, how does this integrate into quantum physics?
That's interesting.
What's your quantum theory of the mind? Is that an unrelated subject?
I don't know if you're joking or not, but like there are some people who posit a quantum theory of the mind.
Yeah. As with all my jokes, I'm also not joking.
Yeah, it would be difficult to discuss all of the pros and cons of that particular idea, but there is this general sense that neurons ultimately function on a level that could have something to do with elementary particles like electrons.
I mean, doesn't that have to be true, and we just haven't figured it out yet?
Here's the thing, is that a lot of quantum effects that are uniquely quantum, that don't translate well up to like our scale, like baseballs and cars and shit like that.
Sure.
A lot of those quantum effects are like entanglement and quantum tunneling and stuff like that. Those things are usually easily broken in wet, chaotic environments where there's a lot of
the brain
atoms.
is very wet and chaotic.
Yes. And some quantum effects are better preserved at cold temperatures, which is why some quantum computers are super cooled and stuff like that. Now, that said, goddamn, this is so far out of the brain stuff. There are some cases where people are pretty sure that there are biological quantum effects. For example, in photosynthesis, which is super far out of the brain stuff. In photosynthesis, there's something called the electron transport chain. And some people think that the electron transport chain is quantum in that it searches all paths and then converges on the shortest path for the electron chain, that's essentially what the quantum Schrodinger's situation is.
Collapses into the single wave function.
Right. And there's a lot of people who suggest that photosynthesis is too efficient to not be quantum.
That's fucking cool, dude.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So there's some people who are like, well, why not our brain? And we just don't have enough data on that.
I don't give a if that's not about the brain. That's insane, dude. That's like the coolest shit we've ever talked about. What the fuck, dude?
So going back to what you were talking about, though, you mentioned putting like actual electrodes in your brain.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I don't want any holes drilled in my brain unless I really gotta have them. You know?
Yeah.
Pussy.
So, I think it's going to be a really interesting question of what people tolerate and what kind of benefits come out of it. But for right now, I think most solutions, like for example, all of the shit that DARPA is funding, DARPA's making big funding on mind-machine interface. One of their rules for the funding is it's supposed to be non-invasive or minimally invasive. And so what they want is maybe you just drill a little tiny hole and you put something in, and then that thing you put in spreads itself throughout your brain or something.
How
like
does
that.
it spread itself?
Like a bunch of little like microparticles,
Or like
we're talking,
Asperger's Niger?
God damn it! What? Aspergillus niger? Black mold?
Yeah, it's a mold interface.
Son of a bitch.
You told me about that once. For sci-fi.
You're having too much fun saying Asperger's is the issue.
That's such a good word.
Anyway, there's a lot of different potential ways, and I mean, there's labs working on this shit right now with some of that good DARPA money.
Look at DARPA being so ethical. The American government always being so ethical.
I don't know if it's got anything to do with ethics, but definitely microparticles, nanoparticles, but then also self-unfolding nanosheets. So it'll be like a sheet that you kind of roll up, and it's nano, so you can still fit it into a needle, and then you inject it out of the needle, and it spreads itself over the area.
That's the coolest shit ever besides photosynthesis.
So, all of that shit's pretty crazy, and I do think that the non-invasiveness is a really good question, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the applications, but basically, in general, you have these different parts of your brain, and some of them we understand better than other parts. The frontal cortex has like a bunch of emotion shit. That's hard to know anything about. But the motor cortex controls sensation and movement. And so these different cortexes, we have a better idea about because people will like poke apart and like their arm will jerk. And be like, all right, like we know what that controls and everything, right?
Right.
And so you can set up electrodes in those spots and get really fine-tuned information about if somebody's thinking about moving their arm or something. So a lot of that technology is where we're at right now. And I think that that's the kind of idea that we're trying to work on, is being able to use these electrodes or maybe more of these electrodes to be able to read what people are thinking about doing.
So that sounds like we're just in it. We're gonna mind interface stuff then.
We're already mind interfacing stuff, but I'm gonna talk about some more details. Let's take a quick break, and then let's go into some of the stuff that like we're currently doing.
name is Jimmy Coconuts, and I'm here to talk to you about the fall of the Roman Empire. The last Roman emperor was Romulus Augustus in 476, but Rome had been in decline for centuries before that. Military adventurism, increasingly symbolic democratic institutions, and gaping wealth inequality polluted the early vision of Rome so completely that people lost faith in the idea of Rome itself. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Yeah, you are. They needed coconuts! Coconut togas! Coconut bathhouses! Aqueducts filled with coconut milk! Think of what the world would have been if the Romans had planted coconuts! Peace on earth! No more war! Infinite coconuts! So come on down to Jimmy Coconut's Coconut Emporium in Orange County. Celebrate the fall of the Roman Empire with the one thing that could have saved it. Coconuts!
Okay, guys, we're back to Petri Dish. My mind is fucking blowing. We're interfacing with machines.
Yeah,
Okay,
girl.
And what we're about to talk about is the shit that blows my mind, which is what we're doing now.
Yeah, so we are doing this stuff. Just so that everybody understands, this isn't just stuff that we're planning to do in lab or anything like that. Like you can currently interface with a machine.
Yeah, there are consumer versions of products where totally uninvasive, you put something on your head or around your head and control a cursor with your mind after some initial setup for relatively cheap.
See, this is what I love about you, Andre, is you're not a scientist, but you are a consumer with a scientific mind. like whatever Sean is researching, you'll know about as a consumer product.
Yeah.
You can go out there, you can buy this stuff, you can control, maybe a mouse cursor on the screen. There's a training period where a computer works to interpret what your different thought patterns should do to a mouse. And so, in a mouse, you're moving things in 2 dimensions, and then maybe you're clicking or something like that, right? There's a lot of more complicated motions that might require more input. So, the visor thing that you put around your head, there's an ultimate limitation to how much information that can pick up, governed mostly by how much information comes out of your brain and how muddled it is. Every single neuron has its own electric field, and the further away you get from them, the more those fields overlap. Okay, so it's like trying to listen to a conversation when there's millions of people talking in a room, right? The further away you get from it, it just sounds kind of like a low buzz, okay? But we can do a lot of stuff already. There's people who are paraplegic or quadriplegic, and we've been able to set up mind-machine interfaces where they can use robotic arms. And so, they basically have learned how to think certain thoughts that will control where the robotic arm moves, and then the robotic arm has a hand that can grasp things. And basically the next step for that, because already people are getting really good at that, really good at manipulating their environment using robotic arms, the next step is feedback. Because when we move our arms around, we have different sensations like proprioception and somatosensory feedback. What all of that is like, you can feel, even with your eyes closed, you can tell you're moving your arm. Like there's a sense of your body. And it's even related to like phantom limb syndrome, right? So even people who don't have that limb anymore can close their eyes and still get an idea like they have that limb and even move it around. And so that sensation, and when you grab things, there's a feedback, right?
So what you're talking about is like, when I go to grab an egg, I feel that I'm touching the egg, and that information going to my brain then lets my brain tell my arm, okay, stop squeezing or you'll break it.
Right, exactly. It's
That's my problem.
Yeah.
That never gets sent back, so I just kill the rabbit.
When you're closing your arm around like a can of Coke or something, you're not thinking that you want to close your fingers by a certain number of inches. You're waiting until you get a sensation that you're gripping it, and then you stop.
Yeah.
Does that make me weird that I think in terms of millimeters? I'm like, close finger by 1 millimeter.
Maybe you are paraplegic and those are robot arms.
This whole time.
Yeah. They never told you.
I'm like that chick who married Krillin in Dragon Ball Z. I'm an android.
Oh, okay.
That's a long way to get to android.
Yeah, holy shit. Okay. Yeah.
So what you're touching on, though, is the information has to go both ways.
Right, yeah, exactly. So right now, a lot of the stuff that we do very easily is read stuff coming out of the brain. What we need to do better, and that we've been working on actively, is sending electric signals into the brain and having the brain interpret that in some kind of useful way. But I gotta say, like this shit 10 years ago, 20 years ago, was just the next step we had to do. We have successfully done these experiments. So there are paraplegic people who have electronic feedback from the robot arms that they're using and have felt a sensation like they're gripping something.
How can people be anti-vaxxers in a world where that's what we're doing with technology? It's like, how the hell? Like, what's going on, man?
There's still people who believe in flat Earth.
Yeah, like, I want to meet the flat earther who has a robotic arm. Who's like, yeah, science figured that out, but the world's flat. Well,
yeah,
what?
so one of the things that what they've done is they've been able to basically send electrical signals into the part of the brain of a tetraplegic person that's normally related to sensing like what your hand is doing.
So tetraplegic is like all the limbs.
Right. So they don't have function of any of their limbs, but when scientists were sending these electrical signals, they could interpret them as a feeling in their hand. Like there was a pressure in their hand. They don't have a hand. But they felt like there was something pushing down on their hand for probably the first time in a very long time.
Would this work for someone who was just born with no arm ever?
Right, so that's a fascinating question, and what we found out is that, so there's something called neuroplasticity, okay? So our brains are hooked up in sort of a general pattern where there's certain zones that tend to control certain things, but there's enough leeway that our brains can change it up a little bit. That's actually one of the complications to mind-machine interfaces is our brains from person to person are not consistent on this. So one person thinking about pizza, that's not going to be the same electrical signals as a different person thinking about pizza. And in fact, there are some people who do not have arms, have never had arms since they were born, and their feet are hooked up to the same neuronal areas that hands usually are. So they'll be as dexterous with their feet because they have the same level of control over them that's normally used in kind of neuronal space for your hands.
So that's why Daredevil is so good at like ninja shit.
Well, but Daredevil lost his sight because of some like chemical explosion thing, right?
So Daredevil's like a comic. It's not based in science.
You brought it up.
I'm just saying, that's Andrei, man. Andrei's always talking about Daredevil.
All right. But look, I guess what I am saying is that I think the answer is yes. I think that people who have never had that ability do have the capacity to have the neuroplasticity to basically form new connections related to stimuli they've never had before. But I think that goes beyond those people. This is going a little bit into our last section. We're not quite there yet. But I actually believe that people who have all of their limbs might be able to develop the ability to move robotic limbs or robots or something completely separate from their body. We could have 8 arms instead of 2.
Dr. Octavius.
Exactly like Doc Ock. Exactly.
So
villainous.
What's some other cool shit that we can do right now?
Right. So one thing I'll say is that one of the examples where we have delivered signals to the brain is through things like cochlear implants. So things that can help people hear is still basically stimulating nerves from audio information. So the audio form will come in to a computer, and the computer will convert that into electrical impulses that it'll send down nerves in your head into your brain. And then your brain, for some people who have been deaf their entire lives, will have to learn how to interpret those signals as some kind of sound. Now, cochlear implants
What about, I've seen videos of babies getting cochlear implants, and it's like, the difference is night and day, immediately. From what I've seen, there's no, learning process. It's like they switch it on and all of a sudden the baby's like, holy crap, I can hear sounds.
Yeah, so for babies, I think one of the great things is that they're still young enough that the nerves are there waiting for signal. For some people who are older adults, some of those nerves have atrophied because of lack of signal, right? So it takes a little bit to, and neuroplasticity for infants is way different than for adults. But in any case, they're innervated properly. Those kids have those nerves waiting. But what I will say is cochlear implants are great, but right now they basically have 16 electrodes. So they can sort of send some mix of 16, some combination of those 16 electrodes can light up, compared to 3,500 neurons that are normally involved with hearing. So these people are not hearing the full scope of what we're hearing,
They're hearing some shit, though.
It's like MP3 versus like lossless, right?
I mean, I think MP3 is way closer to lossless than 16. And, we have retinal implants, too, that are starting to go out there. And so in these cases, it's a similar kind of thing to cochlear implants, except it's taking light in and translating those into electrical signals for your optic nerve.
I'm seeing it's called Argus 2, and it's 60 versus millions of electrodes. What's going on there?
Yeah. So basically, it has 60 electrodes, kind of like how cochlear implants have 16, but for you to get full photon information that we get from sight, we're talking about millions of neurons.
Sure.
Right.
So
you,
it's pretty limited.
Right. They're not seeing the same kind of thing that we're seeing.
You
but
can
it's
make
still,
up some shit.
It's very different from not being able to see anything.
Better than nothing.
Yeah, and so we have that kind of stuff. We're kind of going through other nerves. That's not directly into the brain, but we do stuff directly with the brain too. There's something called deep brain stimulation for people who have Parkinson's. So you're basically sending electrical signals deep into the core of the brain.
I once saw a Tyler Jerry documentary about honey badgers, and that was deep brain stimulation.
Are we plugging our own fake ads in this episode?
They're not fake. Shut
you
up.
son of a bitch.
They're not fake. When he says the honey badger, that gets like right in the cerebral cortex for me.
I was fucking mid-sentence, and you interrupted me to plug your own fake ad.
Don't talk. Just keep talking, baby. I love you. Okay, what were you saying about deep brain stimulation?
Well, the point is that we have ways of sending signals into your brain that do seem to have therapeutic effects. Okay, so there are people with Parkinson's, there are people with epilepsy that you can use different kinds of signals, both electric and magnetic, that seem to be able to change how neurons are firing. And it's not super precise. It like kind of targets a zone of your brain and kind of slams it with a bunch of signal, but it can be enough to like prevent someone from having a seizure, for example. And, for that kind of stuff, especially for the transcranial magnetic stimulation, that is not invasive. So you do not need to drill into their heads to do that.
Well, fuck, dude. So we got all this awesome shit. Like, why am I not hooked up to a machine, like, right now, just fucking playing WoW?
Well, Elon Musk is coming for you, buddy. Because Elon Musk, he's got that company. You know what I'm talking about?
Right. The Neuralink company.
Yeah, so Neuralink, basically, I would not call this non-invasive, because they want to go in there and they want to put 3,000 electrodes on sort of these micron-sized polymer threads. So there'll be like these really fine threads that are just like basically sewn into your brain by a robot. So the robot's pretty freaky looking. It looks like a metal nightmare spider kind of thing.
I trust Elon implicitly. Let's do this.
I don't implicitly.
But basically, it would be taking 3,000 electrons. For the retinal one, we were talking 60. For cochlear implants, we're talking 16, right? 3,000 electrons is way more reading potential. And he wants the electrodes to be two-way. So he wants to be able to send signal out of 3,000 spots also.
That's why I don't trust it, is because he's just going to be sending me Russian propaganda, like, straight to my brain. Like, how can anyone trust these things right now?
It's going to be South African propaganda.
That's the worst. That's the worst propaganda.
But in any case, that one, I feel like I've had a hard time reading through the literature that they've put out to figure out at what point the robot can start sewing it into your brain. Like, I'm pretty sure they got to take your skull off, right? That seems reasonable. But I don't know if they have to take the duramater off, too.
Right.
But in any case, they want to have a robot do it, which is pretty nuts.
How far away are they from doing that?
They've done it in rats.
Okay.
And there's even a crazy picture of a rat that they've kind of sewn all of these guys into, and then it's all running to a USB plug. Because you need to be able to hook up to that information, right? These electrodes are reading a shitload of information out of your brain. How do you read it? With the USB 3.0 cable, basically.
So what's gonna happen when we go through all this? We have like the USB 3.0 plug in our head, and then USB 4.0 comes out.
Right. So
we look like assholes.
Or what happens when Apple decides to come up with their own entirely different like?
I fucking hate Apple.
So what Neuralink wants to do before it gets to that point is to basically have it wirelessly transmitted, near-range wireless transmission, and you'd wear something kind of around your ears. almost like hearing aids look, right? So you'd have a hearing aid, and on the other side of that, inside your skull, would be a transmitter that's transmitting all this data. So you would not have a plug kind of sitting there out of your skin, which,
We're lucky wireless transmission standards never change, huh?
I don't know how it's all going to work. 5G. It's going to be 5G, baby. But, to that point, there's a lot of people who want a more non-invasive strategy, right? And so, one of them is this group called Control Labs. They have this sleeve that you can put on, and the sleeve basically reads your arm neuron movements, right? So like we're way out of the brain now, right? So a signal's traveled out of your brain, it's running down your spinal column, it goes out to these motor neurons that are way out in your arm, but it can pick up basically signals that you were going to send to your hands. And since actually our hands are capable of really fine-tuned movements, there's a lot of information that's coded in those neurons. And so if they can kind of tease that out, it means that you could do things like control a screen, but in like really fine-tuned ways. You could move a mouse around really quickly, you could open up, you could type on a keyboard, all that stuff without actually moving at all. You could just sort of think about moving your hands that way. And eventually train it well enough so that you don't need to move your hands to do it at all.
And we had already talked about DARPA a little bit.
Yeah.
And like all their cool shit.
Yep.
I'm seeing some really sexy like sci-fi endless space words here. Unraveling silk web of electrode neural mesh and then neural dust. What are you talking about?
Yeah, so this is in a sense what we were talking about earlier.
So
neural
DARPA
dust
is the... Oh, okay. Man.
Well, neural dust is like nanoparticles. And the nanoparticles you kind of inject into the brain.
Aren't you worried kids are going to like start eating Tide Pods filled with neural dust? Like that sounds like a drug to me.
I'm worried kids are going to eat any kind of science.
I'm worried about the kids.
But in this case, you inject the nanoparticles in and they go around and they basically land on different neurons and they can potentially enhance the signal. So you get kind of this signal boost, almost like Wi-Fi signal enhancers. And then you can pick them up better through the skull or something like that. The other option, this unraveling silk web thing, is what I was talking about, is you have this kind of nanoscale made out of silk, which is very cool.
That's very cool.
And you can roll it up really finely into a tube that fits inside of a needle.
So we genetically modify silkworms' butts to be bigger.
Yep.
And they shit out this silk.
CRISPR episode.
Cool. And then we put in those electrodes.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
That's right, Skip. So yeah, I think there's a lot of these cool futuristic options that can limit how invasive it is, Like what if instead of trying to read the signal out of the brain, we try to read the signal out of the spinal column? Because there's still a lot of neurons in there, right? So there's these other opportunities. I think now we're kind of getting to the speculative areas. So
Cool.
Why don't we take a break and then we'll go full blown into speculation zone.
Ooh!
Hey Nathan, when was the last time you used the public restroom?
Dude, never again, man. I just shit in the bushes.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Last time I tried to use one, it was in Venice Beach, and it was just like a mountain of syringes in the bowl.
Did you poop?
I mean, yeah, but I got the pokey butt.
Luckily, you're already addicted to heroin. So it's besides the point, really.
Not a big lifestyle.
It was kind of a win-win, actually.
But yeah, man, it makes me wish that there was like a Yelp app except for public restrooms.
Well, luckily for you, man. We've got a new app we're pitching, and this one, guys, this is going to actually revolutionize your life. It's called Dung Hub, and it's where you can find all the information you need for shitting.
Yeah, so we got crowdsourced rating on different public restrooms.
Because, some of them are amazing. Some of them have incense, some of them have magazines. You're going to see that in user reviews out of 1 to 5 stars. And then other ones have literal shit on the walls, syringes in the toilet. Those ones, again, you're gonna find user reviews, 1 star, 2 star. You're gonna know which bathrooms to go to and which bathrooms to avoid.
It's gonna have a waitlist service for the ladies' restroom so that you can go ahead and sign up through the app on the waitlist before you get there, so your wait is not as long.
They're even starting to work with the industry to put QR codes on all bathroom products, so you can actually scan a toilet you really like, so that it's something you can install when you're renovating your home.
Instructions for how to install a bidet. Ratings for nearby proctologists. It's got everything to do with butts and poop.
I'm telling you guys, this is the hub that's going to change your life. The app that's going to revolutionize your anus. It is Dung Hub. Download it. And finally, take that good public shit. Okay, guys, we're back with Petri Dish, and now we're going to talk about all the really crazy sci-fi wacky shit with machine-mind interface. I didn't even read this section because, Sean, you made it sound so exciting.
Yeah, okay. So a little bit of lead-in. There's extremely, extremely early work on something that's a type of mind-machine interface, but is actually more complicated than that. It's a mind-machine-mind interface.
What?
People hooked up together through a computer. Their brains hooked up together.
Wow, I don't like that at all.
So there have been experiments where they've had dudes sitting in different buildings on a campus. And one guy's looking at a computer screen with something that they need to click, like a triangle that needs to get clicked. And then the other dude in a different building has the mouse to actually move the pointer. They both have their brains hooked up to a computer. The guy looking at the screen can send signals to the dude with the mouse to have him move his arm to click on it.
Wait, real quick. When we say hooked up to a computer, what do we mean? We mean like they're wearing like the visor thing, or...
I would think you would need an actual electrode into your brain for this one.
So I'm pretty sure that this one is the ECOG, so this is under the skull layer, but not like individual electrodes stuck into spots.
These guys agreed to have their brain cut open?
Science.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So... But they
Everyone
could do
has
it.
a price, right?
They could do it. One dude could be looking at the screen.
It's a college campus. The price is probably Domino's for 2 days straight. That's not even ethical.
And then
You
the
got a
other
$50
person,
Domino's gift card. We get to drill in your brain.
the other person could move the mouse. And
Oh, that's crazy.
the person looking at the screen got feedback. They could see the mouse moving on their screen. So basically, across a network, two brains were contributing information to each other.
This is going to...
It's like Cerebro.
Yeah, dude.
so
Get the fuck out of my brain, Charles.
Oh my god, that's terrible. This is not the most important way to think about it, but this is going to really change some of the MMOs I know. Because like once you can directly communicate with other players, raids... The biggest problem with raids is the response time between players as they coordinate.
Sure.
You're going to be able to just like destroy World of Warcraft dungeons, like that. No
my
problem.
God, I'm so glad you brought this up. Listen, there was an experiment with multiple brains, so it's not just two people.
What?
There was multiple people hooked up, and what was going on was they had to make a decision, okay? Like, it was like, is this object a square? And it was like a yes or no question, right? And... you had like 10 people hooked up and one person had to make the final decision, okay? But they're hooked up to all these people and they could get these sensations like people were agreeing or disagreeing with that idea. And then that person had to end up picking what to do.
Without seeing the object?
Without seeing the object.
Okay, that makes it way more impressive.
Are these
I thought the guy was also seeing whether the object
Yeah,
was
it's like he
square or
just
not.
knows it's a square.
So the decision maker didn't have all the info. The other people had the info.
Is this like a Chinese campus? Are they doing this in America? They're just drilling holes into people and having to look at squares and circles in America?
America, China, all over the place, man. People are working on this shit.
What is the form you sign when it says I'm gonna get a hole in my brain for this?
But check it out, okay? Listen, if we had the bandwidth to do this to its fullest extent, you wouldn't just share decision-making information. You could share whole things like emotions, like actually make people feel how you feel without having to use words to transmit that information.
You're such a social justice warrior.
There would be no symbolism in between the ability to cause people to be fully empathetic to how you're feeling or thinking.
The world would be destroyed. That's the worst imaginable situation.
You could transmit.
The layer of symbols and culture between us is the only thing that keeps us away from being just like murderous creatures.
Nah, dude, that's the Tower of Babel. We could have built that tower all the way up.
Well, maybe this is the opposite, right? Maybe you can take people who don't have any empathy and like teach it to them. Right.
Or you see people in their truest form and it makes you hate people more.
But what if you could even use this technology further to do things like remove harmful emotions like PTSD or change addiction?
Have you seen no dystopic films?
Yeah, or check this out. What if you use it as a hacker to cause people to have PTSD? Okay? So what I'm saying is that I think that this technology, if taken to its logical conclusion, will actually fundamentally change our interactions with knowledge and each other. Ideas would be able to be transferred whole without having to be changed into words or podcasts or any kind of imperfect shit. Entire whole ideas could be transmitted amongst people.
Sure, this would be the true singularity.
right.
Well, hold on. It's a nice idea, but just like the internet was a nice idea when it was like, oh, it'll be so easy to transmit information around the world. Like,
Yes.
like it seemed like a really good idea, but now it kind of seems like it's just as easy to transmit bad information.
Right.
That's why I'm saying the world would die.
No, I mean, I think this is the truth of it, is that mind-machine interface is the same kind of thing as the internet. Okay, that basically we've had our minds, and for the longest time, the way that we've communicated information, I mean, because technically there was a period before which, humans were not speaking words to each other.
Right.
And then there was language, and then there was writing, and so we've had these different...
That's where we went wrong. Language.
Yeah.
There's been these
we used to
different
just fucking kill.
implementations in order for one mind to communicate with another, right? And we've done things like outsource memory to the internet. At a certain point, we could use mind-machine interfaces to have true direct communication, and not all minds are things that maybe you want to talk to.
It's interesting because as someone who doesn't come out of science, like, we are getting uncomfortably close to really answering basic philosophical questions. Like, I don't like how close we are to really settling the score between Rousseau and Hobbes about whether we're good or evil. I don't like it. I like the fact that we've never been able to really answer that. Once we hook up brain to brain that closely, we're gonna know, and it's gonna be crazy.
Yeah, and brain to brain is going to be a crazy one, but what about brain to AI? When there's the point where there's an AI hooked up to the internet, it knows all that stuff, and we are directly communicating with it.
42.
It's bad enough that everything that is being said in our living rooms and kitchens is being picked up by Alexa. But like when our every thought is being picked up by Alexa, I'm a little concerned.
Yeah, like, hasn't it, like, AIs are always end up being racist because of us? I mean, aren't we worried about if they hear every thought, they're going to be everythingist?
It's a good question of what are we going to do if we truly had full access to everything?
It's terrifying because we don't know the answer, right? Like, we've
Right.
always been able to clothe human nature in all sorts of anthropology. What we're talking about is really stripping all that away and seeing each other's human nature in its fullest naked truth.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, man. That's what I love about this topic, is it's not just about getting to like Doc Ock style control robotic arms. This is about what is going to happen when there's an extra layer on top of your brain, but that's also always there, right? The extra layer of the sum total of human knowledge and all other brains potentially communicating with you.
It's funny because I've always kind of found certain political philosophical questions annoying because they strike me as unanswerable. But like, once you get to the point where we have that layer, haven't we really transcended our basic metaphysical form and have become a new metaphysical entity?
Yeah, I don't fucking know. I guess. I mean, like, it seems fundamentally different from what our existence is now, right? Like, it's hard to fathom what that would feel like and how you would maintain a sense of self. And I don't know. Maybe we'd be totally different. We'd be Homo superior. David Bowie.
I mean, what's really scary is the fact that it would, yeah, right? Stacey loved that. Stacey in the corner being like, ooh, I like it. No, but I mean, what I think is interesting is how, like, I'm sure it'll still partition into power as it exists today. You'd have different communities, different polities, like creating different amounts of mind-to-mind interfaces. And so, it probably wouldn't actually solve anything that I think it might solve, because you wouldn't create one huge human global community. You'd probably create little communes that would be influenced by certain Hobbesian or Rousseauian assumptions. And you would just relitigate all the same philosophical questions. You've just changed the unit of analysis from each empirical human to each empirical human collective.
I mean, maybe, dude. All I gotta say is that I do think there's something fundamentally different when faced with the possibility of truly feeling what another person feels. I think there's a certain barrier that exists because, like, we're all ourselves. You know what I mean? Like, and we only know what we are, truly. Other people are, like, at least moderately a mystery to us. No longer having that mystery, I think that kind of extreme empathy is, like, human changing.
I don't know. You guys don't think it'll be something kind of like how it is now online, where people are in a sense get to be their true selves hiding behind this like screen, and their true selves often end up just being like awful racist trolls?
It depends on how much control there is in what you put out and take in. You know what I mean? And I don't know. This shit is coming. Do you guys like? You know what I mean? Like, this stuff is coming. It's not 10 years down the road. It's further than that. But just like CRISPR is coming, and the implications are clear and are already happening, mind-machine interface, that shit's coming, and we need to start having ethical conversations about like what the fuck that's going to look like.
Dude, we can't have ethical conversations about Southern California being on fire. Right? Like, we can't have ethical conversations about like Donald Trump. He's president every day of our lives. We can't have ethical conversations about him. We're dude.
Yeah, well, now the people know.
Okay, wait. I have a quick question though.
Yeah.
Andrei, who would you be willing to be linked mind to mind with?
Absolutely no one.
Right. Sean,
I would be a holdout on that technology.
Yeah.
For sure. I just like any social media, I would be like, you know what?
I don't know.
Let me sit this one out.
I'm gonna wait to feel it out. Yeah. How many Rohingya die from this technology?
I would be a late adopter, personally. Yeah.
Sean, how about you? Would you mind to mind with anybody?
Paul Rudd.
Okay, now this is real talk. Stacy, would you mind to mind with me, your husband? That's all right.
Whoa, that's a hell no out of Stacy.
The feeling is mutual. I think a lot of things. Do we have anything else to talk about, though? Because I'm scared now.
Yeah, let's wrap it, baby.
Well, thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If you thought that was stimulating or really fucked up, please tweet at us, @DishPodcast. Email us, petridishpod@gmail.com. Sign up for Patreon, patreon.com/petridish.
Thanks to Stacy, our sound lord who doesn't want to mind with her husband, but that's all right. Thanks to Brian Allen, Art. Thank you to Andrei for coming in on another episode.
Thanks for having me.
Woo!
Yeah, and thank you, listeners. I'm going to start closing it out with Ich bin ein Science.
Ich bin ein Science!